Let's take a closer look at the Epic Heroes series Stormtrooper 4-inch action figure.
Varykino, living the Star Wars life.
Hello there, and thanks for visiting the Varykino YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be unboxing the Epic Heroes series 4-inch figure of the classic Stormtrooper. This is a new line from Hasbro that's clearly aimed at the younger fan and collector, but you know what, I am curious. There was something really cool about this new packaging style, and I always like to check out new lines from Hasbro to see if it's something I'm actually interested in collecting further. I picked up a few from this line. I have recently unboxed the Darth Vader figure. I'll have that one linked down below, but as you can see, we're up to the Stormtrooper because it looked really cool on the store shelf. So I want to see if this is something I want to collect, maybe put in a few places around my home. I'm always looking for lower priced collectibles to put in other places around my home office, you know, those places that might get a little bit of sun, a little bit of dust, a little bit of exposure, places where you're not going to put your most priciest collectibles, because I like to have Star Wars all around my home. So let's take a closer look at the packaging. We've got a nice, clear, easy to read black Star Wars logo here against white. We can see this is for ages 4 and up because we do have a small accessory here. I'm really digging the line art here of the Stormtrooper coming towards us, holding his E11. It's just really cool. I really like it there. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to pick this one up. I wanted a carded example because this is just so fun and different to what we have seen in recent years. Most 4-inch figures are primarily from the vintage collection line, which has a very distinctive, very classic retro style card art. This one just looks so different and it's just so bright and cheerful. We've got a nice readable yellow stripe here for the character name, Stormtrooper, and we can clearly see the figure inside, though his lower legs are hidden behind that cardboard insert, so we can't get a full view of how tall he is. This does mention that it is a 4-inch tall figure. As we know, modern Star Wars action figures, going all the way back to Kenner, are known as 3.75, so I'm curious to see if this is simply rounding it up and it will be about the same height as the figures we know, or whether they have scaled it up slightly for younger hands. So there we go. We can see that we've got the Disney logo there in the corner, Hasbro logo there at the bottom. Let's take a closer look at the back. And we've got a nice image there of the Stormtrooper against a bright yellow background, blue for all of the copyright and warning details there. We have a little bit of a bio for younger fans who are being introduced to Star Wars. Stormtroopers are elite shock troops, fanatically loyal to the Empire and the Imperial cause. So, very high level, gives us a little bit of an explanation. These are the Imperials, the bad guys of Star Wars. So, great for young fans learning who's who in Star Wars. So, this is so fun. I'm really liking when Hasbro experiments with new toy lines. I generally collect a few examples going all the way back. I have Galactic Heroes, I have Mission Fleet, and I really do enjoy when they explore a few different lines. Well, time will tell whether this one will last. We do know that there are subsequent waves already in the works, including vehicles, so I am optimistic about this one. So I guess that's the packaging, a little bit of why I am interested in this line and hope that it will do well, because I'm always for younger fans coming on board as Star Wars collectors and sharing the passion, especially if you have parents or family members that want to share it with younger family members. It's always fun when you can collect together as a family, so I'm hoping this line does well. But for now, let's get this action figure out of the packaging so we can really take a closer look at all of the details. So now we have the figure and the E11 blaster accessory out of the packaging, and I have to say, this is kind of fun. I know there's going to be some immediate things that people are going to be seeing and going, oh, I'm not so sure about that. And of course, I have to mention it. We have these interesting peg holes in the forearms. So there are some deluxe figures in this line that come with different sort of play feature accessories. Sabine in particular looks like she has one that clips over her forearms. So I get the feeling perhaps we will see some sort of deluxe sets in the future, and they're trying to sort of future-proof the figures by having sort of attachment points on them. But that is going to stop adult collectors, I think, from appreciating this toy line, because without the accessories that are supposed to clip onto that included with the specific figure, it does kind of look a little bit odd. And I don't know that children would necessarily notice that, but of course collectors are going to. So that is obviously one point that is a negative for me. We can also see on the back, we have a large hexagon type attachment point on the back. Less noticeable, less intrusive, because we're generally going to be displaying these on a shelf if we are adult collectors. But kids are going to, I guess, perhaps have some options of things to attach on the back, jetpacks and the like. So yeah, we've got that there instead of the correct details for the back plate there as well. Taking a closer look, we've got a pretty clean paint job going on here. It's actually tidier than I was perhaps expecting. You know, sometimes kids' toys, the paint can be a little bit iffy. We've got some pretty tidy paint on the helmet here. We've got the black lenses, the black stripe, grille, and the details at the front here. We've got a little bit of grey going on for some of the accent details. None in the back of the helmets here. These are white. They're not painted. They're just recessed there. And of course, if you are familiar with Stormtrooper helmets, you will notice one detail that is not here. There is no blue tube stripes here on the cheek. But if you are perhaps a little bit more familiar with the vintage ones, I have one here on hand. You may remember that, of course, because of the simple sculpting and paintwork of the vintage figures, they also did not have tube details. So there's kind of like a fun retro connection there. And of course, there is that weird costuming anomaly where there was a Stormtrooper on screen that was actually missing that on the helmet. So you could say it is accurate to one specific Stormtrooper, but it's kind of fun because, of course, the original figures were designed for children, as is this one. So it's kind of fun that there's like that little bit of a note. Of course, it is not really a nod to the vintage collecting era. This is just saving money by not having to put a different color and some small details on the helmet, but I just thought it was kind of fun. And honestly, it's kind of fun just having that clean black and white all over paint scheme, and I don't think children are even going to notice that there are blue stripes missing. But yes, that is another item that will perhaps put this on the I won't bother picking it up list for collectors. Unfortunately, this will not be an army builder. If you're looking for some figures to perhaps flesh out a garrison by putting them in the back of your action figure display, there are a few things. I mean, if you want to have a go, perhaps you could paint them on and maybe do something about the forearms, or perhaps if you stand them facing forward, you know, you could put them deep in the back of your display to sort of flesh things out. But yes, there are a few things that are going on that are not going to be quite right there. Have to say the proportions of this look a little bit better once I get it out of the box. There was something about it that perhaps looked a bit perhaps big through the chest or broad or something like that. The proportions are slightly different to what I am used to with the vintage collection line, but to be honest, it's not wildly off or sort of really stark. I am sure we will notice a little bit of a difference when I get to the comparison stage, but to be honest, it is a great improvement over those figures from the mid to late 90s that we had from Power of the Force 2 that had very big chests. So we're already seeing an improvement there. Now, of course, this is a 5-point of articulation figure. We're not going to have too much in the way of posability, and we lose some accuracy to make up for the very simple hinge joints there. So absolutely nothing in the knees and just a very simple sort of forward and back at the hip. Very much like the vintage Kenner era. We go a little bit to the back, but we're kind of hitting here at the armor. So it's not going to go back further than that, but we can kind of get a sitting pose because we know there are going to be vehicles added to this line. So we hope that perhaps there'll be an Imperial ship of some kind. Maybe we'll get a TIE fighter and they'll be able to sit down in a vehicle. So it's good that we can get to that pose already. And I kind of like the stance. I noticed when I got this one out, he has a slightly offset stance. They're not exactly straight, which kind of just looks a little bit interesting. And I do find that without sort of the ankle articulation, he's very sturdy. He stands up really well, which is good if you're a kid or perhaps a collector wanting to pose these things on your shelf. The flat feet and straight legs do make it very sturdy for standing up. As you can see, we've got some pretty standard one axes for the arms. They just rotate around. We can't go out to the sides, and we can't do anything around the elbows, and the hands are also fixed. They do not rotate there. We've got some pretty classic grips here just for sort of holding an accessory. We don't have a trigger finger like we often see on the right hand of the vintage collection. It is just a standard grip, and the helmet just turns. It's not really designed to come off. You could probably pull it off because we can see a fairly simple attachment underneath there, but there isn't a head or anything sculpted underneath. This is not a removable helmet. It's just there, and yeah, we can turn it around so we can get a little bit of posability there. But yes, so I think this looks pretty cool. You know, there's a few things that are going to make it a miss for collectors. And I know that this is a children's toy. We can't be holding it up to quite the same benchmark. But to be honest, I think this is kind of cool. You know, I'm always looking for things to put on my desk, have in places that get a bit more sun. And, you know, I don't want my vintage collection figures going yellow because of sunlight exposure, but perhaps a cheaper toy that I picked up on sale could be just the thing. I think it looks kind of fun. To my eyes, the helmet is a slightly different white to the white of the chest. I think they've perhaps used slightly different plastic, or perhaps just the manufacturing process. And it's possibly not even showing up on camera. It's very, very subtle. This one looks like a more sort of true white, and there's like just the tiniest hint of leaning towards cream for the helmet up here. Less so towards the back. The difference, perhaps the more of the black on the back. Oh, and on the back, we've got a fairly prominent number stamp here on the back of the thigh, but you can see the black paint used for the undersuit is very clean and tidy. Honestly, it looks pretty nice. We've got all of the details that we would expect. We've got all of sort of the lines up the back of the armor. We've got the thermal detonator. No paint apps on the thermal detonator, no gray stripes or any detailing, but we've got some good sculpting going on there. There's actually more sculpting here than I was perhaps expecting. I thought it might just be a straight cylinder, but we've actually got all of this tiny detail, even if it isn't accented with paint. And we've got all of the armor detail lines, including the grooves on the outside of the forearm armor. We just don't have the detail in the back plate there because of that peg hole attachment. But overall, if you are looking for a Stormtrooper figure, perhaps your kids have been eyeing up your action figure display and want something for themselves, or perhaps you are introducing them to Star Wars and Star Wars collecting, I think this is a great option for kids. And of course, every Stormtrooper's got to have a weapon. We have a nice black E11 blaster here. Plain black, no sort of special finishes or weathering, but it is pretty detailed for a kid's toy. We've got all the kind of details that we would expect. It's perhaps a little bit oversized for the figure, but then again, we are dealing with younger children in mind. It's going to have to be something that is not a choking hazard, though of course this is for 4 and up. I think younger kids would still do some damage with this, but it looks pretty good. It has a little bit of a trigger loop there, but they don't have fingers to fit inside. So let's go and see how well we can get to the grip held in here for posing. One thing I do particularly like about some of these 5-point of articulation ones is they don't move at the hands. So I find it is easier to get weapons into their hands. Their hands don't sort of rotate and escape away from me. So the hands are quite glossy, I have to say. And let's see, this is actually a little bit tougher than I was hoping, because I think kids might struggle to do that. That was a little bit tough. Once it's in there, that's really in there. It took a little bit of work, and perhaps that will soften up if you sort of do some poses and things like that. But I do have to say, you know, watching the way kids play, I'm thinking back to perhaps that famous scene in E.T. If you are playing with figures and making them do things in the backyard or the sand pit, This thing is not going to drop its weapon. You won't lose this thing unless you really knock it out of its hand. That thing is in there, which is always kind of fun for accessories. I have, you know, a paranoia of misplacing accessories for my Star Wars action figures. So it's nice that this one is kind of in there. And yeah, I can sort of knock it and that's not going to come out. So nice and sturdy. And to be honest, it's not terribly oversized when I get it in his hand. It doesn't look wildly out of scale. His hand is tipped a little bit, and because I have no option for tipping his hand or his arm, the blaster is a little bit at an angle. It's not straight on, but you know, it's a pretty good sort of firing stance there for a Stormtrooper. So I think that looks pretty cool. Overall, some pluses and some minuses, but yes, it really depends what sort of motivates you to add new figures to your collection and who they are for. I think some collectors will like this as just a little memento of perhaps their favorite Star Wars character to put on their office desk or at work. Other people will be looking to introduce their younglings to Star Wars collecting, and I think this will be really fun, especially at that cheaper price point. Here in New Zealand, they're about half the price of vintage collections, so even cheaper on sale, which is always great. So I've got a few other figures on hand, but first let's compare it to the Darth Vader figure from the same collection. So I unboxed this one earlier. I will have the video for that one linked down below. This one is the Darth Vader from the Epic Hero series line, and it also unfortunately suffers from that weird pig hole in the sleeves. But yes, I was really curious to see how these two look together. If I can get Vader to stand up straight, because I was curious about the height of the two. So if I get these two as close as I can together, we can see that Vader is an appropriate higher height than the Stormtrooper. Perhaps not fully to height. Maybe he'd be a little bit taller if it was, you know, a proper scale. But honestly, I think that that's pretty good. If we can get them back to back, we can see just how tall the Darth Vader is. I think that looks pretty good, actually. I was curious to know if the line was all going to be like all 4 inches tall, so everything sort of felt the same in a child's hand, or whether it was going to be, you know, perhaps 4 inches for standard characters and others were taller. Maybe Darth Vader was going to be the 4-inch tall one and everyone else was going to be varied around it. Going back to the vintage era, there were taller figures and shorter figures, so I figured perhaps they'd go that route. And yes, they look pretty cool together. Where I'm starting to build my Epic Hero series Galactic Empire with Darth Vader and Stormtrooper. I have noted that the figures from this first wave of this collection all appear in Disney Plus series. So Vader and Stormtroopers we see in Obi-Wan Kenobi. And of course, we've got other characters like Din Djarin and Grogu, of course, from The Mandalorian. So you can really see that they are targeting that younger demographic that are learning about Star Wars from the Disney Plus series, the modern era. So it'll be really interesting to see what we'll get down the line, whether we'll start to see perhaps a prequel collection, you know, for people that are introducing their kids to the Phantom Menace like they found Star Wars when they were young in the 90s and early 2000s. But yes, enough chit chat. I'm just having so much fun unboxing these figures. Let's get some other Stormtroopers out and compare them in terms of accuracy and scale. So now I have 4 Stormtroopers in a row. This one here is the Epic Hero series that I just unboxed. Over here we have the Power of the Force 2 from the 90s, very iconic, and you can see we've made some improvements here. This one is from the animated series Rebels that came out a few years ago. This one is obviously very stylized to match the show, but it is a 5-point of articulation one, and because of the style of that show, I feel like this was an example of a Stormtrooper that many kids would have had around that time. Over here, we have a vintage collection Stormtrooper. More specifically, the one from the deluxe set, the Imperial Stormtrooper Navarro Cantina that came with the E-Web. This is a recent example of a pure white Stormtrooper, certainly the most recent one that we got here in New Zealand, so that's the one I have on hand. So now we can take a closer look, and to be honest, I think this one is really standing up well, especially when we line it up next to the others. Stormtroopers. It is by far a clear improvement over the Power of the Force 2 in terms of proportion, the helmet sculpt, just everything about it, really. I always thought the stance on this one was kind of funny, the way that it's sort of standing with its legs apart. We generally see Stormtroopers standing a little straighter. This one is obviously very stylized. They had very slender legs, and it was just a completely different style, but it's really interesting to see how it really stands up. And to be honest, I think this one's doing not too bad. There were some things that I didn't like about it, those weird holes in the arms, and perhaps the lack of those tube stripes that we have on all of the other versions is perhaps just one minor little detail. You think it may not have cost Hasbro too much more money to do that, and maybe collectors would have bought some more. But there we go. And honestly, seeing it next to the vintage collection, we might see a bit of a difference if you try and army build this one in the background of your vintage collection, but I think this is a pretty good sculpt for the price point, considering that there is a big difference. I could buy 2 Stormtroopers for the cost of this one. If this one was a carded one, I know this one is deluxe, and that's even more of its own story. I haven't been able to find a carded white one here in New Zealand for a long time. Unfortunately, some are exclusives that just never make it here to New Zealand. But yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, the blaster is a little bit more closer to the one of the 95 era, 96, but bigger than the Rebels one. The Rebels ones kind of feel a little bit undersized by today's standards, but that was the style of that animated line. It wasn't designed to fit in with the others. But when I put these two together, it is a little bit taller. So I can kind of see why perhaps they labeled it as a 4-inch scale rather than 3.75. You can see it is a little bit taller, and so it's got just a slightly sort of buffed up appearance. It looks thicker through the chest, through the waist, everything about it just looks a little bit bigger. So I do see why they have called it a different scale there, and I don't think you'll potentially be using this as an army builder, even though that price point was very, very tempting. But honestly, seeing it compared with all of these other ones, I think if you put this one by itself somewhere like a bookshelf or your desk somewhere, I think it is quite a good option for that. If you're just looking for something fun and simple, and maybe you're not a fan of Funkos or just want something a little bit more iconic and true to the original Kenner line of figures. It definitely makes me think of that, with that 5-point of articulation, the simple paintwork. You know, we've got no paint buttons on the abs, all really simple. Everything's kind of sculpted flat, unlike the vintage collection one where we've got all the little details here, like the belt pouches and the details on the belt, the articulation of these ones, the painting down the back, and all of that detail. You're obviously not going to get that from a children's toy, but honestly, you have to stop and sort of compare them to really notice all those details. When I take the others away, this one really looks pretty cool. So for one last comparison, I'm just going to pop this one out of the way here in the back. This particular toy reminds me of when Hasbro tried another toy line for kids, and this was kind of the kid version of the Black Series. I have unboxed this one on the channel a little while ago. This was during their plastic-free packaging era, so there was a blind box of these simple, for us here in New Zealand, these were $10. This figure here retails for about $20, so these ones were kind of simple, and it was really interesting to see how they were going to go about creating like a Black Series line for younger collectors. And I have the figure here, so a lot bigger. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was this one has no articulation through the legs, and they didn't paint the back of it. You can see we've got no black for any of the details on the back. It is just plain white with some black details, and the blaster was sculpted into its hand. So I know that technically we got a lot more plastic for the $10 of this figure compared to the $20 of this one, but there is so much more playability in this one. This one is just, it's just a solid lump. You know, I can move it through the waist, but you can't move the legs. You can just move the arms and a little bit through the head. Nope, the head doesn't even move. So it really was basically just a static figure with some limited posability and almost no painting on the back. It almost looks really bizarre when you turn it around, and because of that blind box, you couldn't tell what it could move, what the paint was like, and everything like that. So I was hoping it would be fun. wasn't quite as good as I was hoping. So the fact that this one is already a big improvement, we've got articulation, we've got really tidy paint there. I think that this is a great option for younger fans and kids getting into Star Wars, wanting some toys of their own, and perhaps getting into collecting. Because you know what? This has the potential to be the Kenner for the new generation. In 20, 30 years, kids will be remembering this as their first toy. And honestly, when you look back at those Kenner toys, this is pretty accurate when you compare it to what kids of the 70s and 80s were playing with. Just that hole in the arms. It could have been a real winner. Just I could have done with the cheek tubes, the stripes not being there. I could have looked past that, but those holes, I'm really hoping there are some really cool play features coming out, because if a kid bought this right now, there's nothing to attach to that, so they kind of seem a little bit out of place. But yeah. You can see I'm having a lot of fun checking out Stormtrooper toys. It's so iconic, isn't it? My husband has worn a Stormtrooper armor as a costumer for many, many years, so I have a soft spot for it. And I think just about every Star Wars fan is going to love the iconic Stormtrooper. So, of course, there's always a lot of interest when there is a new version of the toy. And I think this one is a win. I think it's cool. The holes aside, I think this one is fun, and I can see myself getting a few more of these to scatter in different bookshelves and displays around the house, because from the forward-facing pose, I can't even really see the holes that much, and I think it just looks fun. So thank you so much for hanging out with me while I unbox a new Star Wars Stormtrooper figure from Hasbro and have a little bit of a comparison and a little bit of fun at checking it out and see how it compares with other Stormtrooper figures from over the years. I think this is a winner. I think this is fun. Thank you so much for watching. I know this is a slightly longer video, but it is part of a new series that I will be doing celebrating the classic Imperial Stormtrooper. I've got lots of other figures to unbox in the coming week, so do subscribe if you want to see more Stormtrooper collectibles coming up very shortly on the channel, because yeah, the Stormtroopers are fun, aren't they? Thank you so much for watching. Catch you in the next video, and as always, may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, check out our other videos, and subscribe for alerts about new uploads. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.